Welcome to the Giving Business Soul podcast, where we speak with successful entrepreneurs who have learned to integrate soul and business, redefining leadership, and ultimately utilizing business as a force for good. Send that to you as well. So with that, I think we're going to drop on in. I cannot tell you, everyone listening, how excited I am to have this special guest with us today. And so special that I ended up writing and having some written stuff here that I want to present to get us started. So today is truly a special guest, a woman whose profound work has been a beacon of light in the realm of spirituality and consciousness. She is a renowned author and scholar, best known for her groundbreaking books of Merchants of Light and the Miracles of Death. Her work dives deep into the ancient wisdom traditions and the transformative power of altered states of consciousness with a PhD in comparative literature and a focus in, I'm going to say it, shamanism, mythology, and religion. Betty has dedicated her life to exploring the rich and often hidden narratives of human history. Through this amazing book called The Merchants of Light, she invites us to rediscover the ancient wisdom that can guide us in our modern lives, offering insights that are both timeless and urgently relevant. Her scholarly achievements and her passionate commitment to sharing this knowledge have made her a revered voice in the field of consciousness studies. So with that, I am truly honored to have Betty Kovács with us here as the authors of Merchant of Light. Betty, thank you for saying yes to this.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Gosh, this is going to be a fun conversation. It's been such a delight, as I mentioned the first time I wrote an email to you, to find that we actually live in the same city.
I know.
In the same city. And, when I started first reading the book, there was just so many synchronicities just in reading the book. And then to find out that you're in my neighborhood, I mean, if there's ever been a breadcrumb that God left me, it's like, here you go. Here's Betty in your neighborhood. You've been the president of the Jungian Society for 25 years, something to that degree. And Jung is one of my heroes. And so to have somebody so profound in his study and just a scholar, it really is such a pleasure, Betty. Thanks again for doing this.
Thank you. I was not quite that long,
okay.
But I did serve as president and program chair for many years. And it was a wonderful group. We all worked together beautifully. And we had Jungian scholars, but we also had people whose work related to Jung. And it was a learning situation for all of us. I taught in college for 25 years. That's where that
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it. Well, thanks for clearing that up. But, there's so many ways to start this podcast, but I think what I would really love to do is I feel like it would be so useful. Obviously, you have written this amazing book called The Merchants of Light. And obviously, immediately, as I saw the image and the angelic figure there holding the Holy Grail, I immediately knew that there's something very special. I had to dive into this work. I feel like where I'd love to take the listeners is back to the origins. I've been somebody that I'm a pseudo scholar, a scholar by my own right, just someone that has dived deep into a lot of these teachings.
That's sometimes the best.
yeah, exactly. There's no, sort of filter.
Boundaries.
It's like no boundaries. I'm just kind of following the impulse. And I was always searching in my mind, where and how did humanity sort of take a wrong turn? And I had found a lot of pieces to the puzzle, but I believe that what you share in the book, I think just elucidates very clearly to anybody that is in this sort of work of finding truth. I think it just really kind of begins to demonstrate where the root of this thing went. So maybe if we can start there with the understanding at 621 BC, what happened there with the Deuteronomist, and how did our mythos, this story that has been informing our humanity, where did it kind of take a wrong turn a bit there?
Yes, well, I have to start with always thanking Margaret Barker, who's a great scholar in the Old Testament. And when all the texts that had existed in the ancient world, that had been found were available, she could put them all together and with the canon and see much, much larger picture. So she saw very clearly that for quite some time, even before Josiah in 621 BCE, that there was an attempt to destroy the Temple of Solomon and to destroy the shaman mystic tradition that temple was all about. We didn't know that until she realized it. But with King Josiah in 621 BCE, there was a story that was told that, the Deuteronomist priest found a text in the temple that said we should go in this direction, and this is the way we should be doing things. And as she points out, no one really knows who the Deuteronomists were. A small group. It's interesting.
Yeah.
A small group. And yet the power that they were able to wield over the people is just incredible and influenced the entire Western world.
Wow.
So they destroyed the sacred rituals within the Temple of Solomon. And that temple was constructed according to the three dimensions that exist in reality. We know, if we look at it from the human perspective, it's the material world. And so the great auditorium was the human world in time and space, material reality. But the curtain was there that opened up for the high priest to go into the Holy of Holies.
Yes.
And in the Holy of Holies, there he merged with the first world order, which is the completely formless, pure intellect, pure spirit, no form whatsoever. And it is always moving into the archetypal world, which is the Holy of Holies. So when the priest enters that, they call that experience day one, because the formless world moves into the archetypal world where it is shaped by the laws of the universe, the laws of nature, and it expresses itself in symbols. That is its language. And it's also the language of the right brain that we have. So the great high priest would experience the union in the Holy of Holies. And there is even talk that there was the symbol of that we see in India of the male and female together, dancing together and merging together. That, of course, was destroyed, so some people disagree that it was there. But what we do know is that the great high priest merged with the formless dimension of reality as it came into the archetypal world.
Wow.
And when he came out, he had that experience. Even the colors in the curtain were different. His colors were different in the robes. So it was a very intricate, detailed, symbolic ceremony. And so there were the three worlds.
Yeah.
And so the Deuteronomists got rid of that. They didn't want that kind of thing. And of course, so important was the feminine dimension of the divine, which is in each of us, but so is the masculine dimension. The masculine, of course, was represented by the great high priest, but the feminine was the great high priestess. And wisdom, she was called wisdom.
Yes.
And Barker makes it very clear that in this earlier literature, Yahweh was married to wisdom. They were one, they worked together, and together they co-created the world. And later, Yahweh forgets that. But the Deuteronomists destroyed all of her symbols. She was the tree. She was the tree of life that gave everything to human beings. And they were her people. She loved them. She sought for their well-being always. And the tree was a symbol of that. So there were groves and groves of trees around the Temple of Solomon. Those were destroyed. And there were just hundreds and hundreds of symbols of the feminine. Those were destroyed. And so later in history, people thought there was no feminine at all, because what was left was just Yahweh.
Sure.
And Yahweh was a completely disturbed, pathological person, being, because he was jealous.
Right.
He was had chosen people. He helped them in battles to fight.
Sure.
and he had law. Everyone should follow Yahweh's law, which was the Deuteronomist law, of course. But he was like our modern day pathological tyrants who want to rule the world. And he suffered too. I mean, it's very typical of the left brain, which he was. He had become left brain only because the feminine was gone. The right brain and the heart consciousness was destroyed. And so what happens when we just live in the left brain? We need novelty. We need something different all the time. And we get bored. And he got bored with the whole creation. I'm sorry that I made this. I think I will blot it out utterly. I mean, this is such a picture of what we now know is the illness of the left brain, as Ian McGilchrist in the Master and His Emissary shows very clearly from a lot of different scientist research, that the left brain, when it's severed from the higher dimensions of the right and, of course, the heart, which connects us to the universe, that it becomes so pathological that it has the same characteristics as a schizophrenic.
Wow.
So this is what happened in 621. Yahweh became our modern-day tyrant, and we're still fighting the same kinds of endeavors to take over the world.
Wow.
And control it.
Yeah. Well, that's beautifully said. Thank you for sharing that historic situation there that happened. Because when I discovered that, obviously understanding the centerpiece of the initial temple being the Holy of Holies, I understood that. And then to find out that the Deuteronomists came in to eliminate sort of the Queen of Heaven, Lady Wisdom, and get rid of her sacred groves and rituals, and to convert that story that was so prevalent in that time of Mesopotamia, where we had the tree of life, we had this axis mundi, and the idea was that when we incarnate as humans, we want to eat from this tree of life, that it would help in regaining our own consciousness of our own divinity, and that this was an expansive thing to do and the right thing to do. And all of a sudden, the story gets inverted, and it now no longer is the tree of life. It becomes this tree of knowledge.
Of good and evil.
Of good and evil. And this Genesis story that we've been told, where at that moment in time, now eating the fruit is evil. And as a result of this original sin of our humanity, we then get casted out of the garden, right? Which then I think even severs this connection to that side of the brain even more.
Oh,
so
absolutely.
it's a metaphor for the separation.
That's a beautiful way of putting it. Is a metaphor for the separation of the right brain and heart consciousness.
Yes, and that separation has really sort of moved us into what you just shared, where it's like to have power and not wisdom is a terrible combination.
That's where we are.
And that's where we are. So, and what I've always felt that was, or in my exploration of consciousness and where things are, it was the reintegration of the feminine in our own consciousness as the way that we relate to divinity, this missing component. And, but again, for me, it was like, okay, well, I know where the work is. We have to dive into this aspect to heal ourselves, to reclaim our lost divinity. But to find the origin of where that split was for me was just so, groundbreaking in so many ways, because I think when we educate ourselves in that aspect of where the root of this separation happens, I think it just sort of clears things up for us.
Oh, it does. In Western culture, it definitely does. And the tree was also split into two trees. There was originally just one tree, and it was a tree of cosmic consciousness, of who we are, potentially. And so when Adam and Eve ate of the tree of good and evil and were cast out of the garden, the angel was there with a sword to keep them from ever entering again and from never eating from the tree of eternal life. That was the other one. And this is exactly what the tree was all about. First of all, that we know we are immortal. We have eternal life. And that we are divine. And that we are great creators. We evolved to co-create with the universe. That's who we are. And all of that was denied. But imagine having a God send an angel with a sword so that we could never return, never know these things about ourselves. And we were always in need of being saved or fixed, or
Right.
now today transhumanized, or eliminated altogether into AI.
Sure. Well, I mean, because I've shared that sentiment many times. I don't know if it comes from an ancient quote or an ancient philosopher, but it's like the greatest trick the devil ever played on humanity was to make us believe that God was outside of us.
Exactly.
Right? That immediately puts humanity on its knees because it doesn't remember its own divinity.
Exactly.
Right.
And it was done in such a brutal way that you're nothing.
Yeah.
You have sinned against God. No, they hadn't. They did what was absolutely important for them to do.
Yes.
But that constantly, from that story on, everything would indicate that we're less than.
Yeah.
I think I mentioned to you, just like I saw a picture of the universe and there's a little teeny speck and an arrow saying, you are here. And so you're insignificant. You're just a speck. Well, what about the holographic universe? I can be a speck, but the universe is within me.
Yeah.
But we didn't know that for a long time.
Sure.
But it's that sense that we have to govern you.
Right.
Yahweh now gives you laws because you don't know how to behave.
Yeah.
And always you are less than.
Yeah.
And that's what's happening today on a massive scale.
Level.
And so I just heard someone the other day say, it's actually true that there are those in Silicon Valley who really believe it's over for the species.
Yeah.
The human species doesn't have it.
Right.
We'll make a better one.
Yeah.
We will make a better one.
Yeah, sure. Well, yeah, and obviously I write about the great truth, and that in Sanskrit, the most ancient language we have on the planet, Hu means God. So human means God-man. This sort of idea, this was embedded within the human name from the very beginning, but again, we lose sight because the story we all hear at the beginning of our life is quite the opposite of that we are far from divine, that we're sinners, that we must atone and get on our knees, wait to be saved. That entire sort of story, I feel is now breaking apart. It's starting to, it feels to me that 2020 sort of accelerated the process where humanity is beginning to see. We're beginning to see through the corruption more and more. But I would love to continue on with, I know that there was multiple times where, this new consciousness that we're speaking about that's trying to emerge had attempted itself multiple times. I, as a student of history, have began studying and have been studying Yeshua outside of the religious confines. So I've been studying him from the Essene tradition, the Aramaic tongue that he spoke, and really deciphering the true teachings. I started to study the Roman Empire and really understood what they were sort of up against, or not up against, but what they were trying to do, what their attempt was. And so once I understood Constantine, Theosidus, these emperors that certainly didn't want to give us the full truth. That it wasn't in their interest. Empires are ego-based, about totalitarian control. And so you have this great man in Yeshua that sort of comes back to, in my estimation, to reestablish, the truth.
Well, yes, and Margaret Barker says that he was the rebirth of the Solomon Temple, of the shaman mystic tradition. He was a renaissance of that, probably out of the Essene Therapeutic groups. There are scholars who don't agree that Essenes were at the Dead Sea.
You're right.
But I think that the evidence is becoming overwhelming.
Yeah.
But certainly he was a rebirth of that ancient tradition of who we really are.
Mm-hmm.
And when we found the Nag Hammadi text, he makes it very clear that that's what he's all about, to remind us of who we are.
That's right. Yeah, he came as the great revealer of, demonstrating of who we are, what our role is. And when you read the unaltered version of his teaching, you feel the profoundness.
so-
I mean, even in the canon text, it's profound. But when you go into the
Yeah,
true,
it's true.
unfiltered, it's activating. It's beautiful. It almost feels to me that cellularly it starts to remind us, because he wasn't saying he was the only one capable. He was saying,
Oh,
do as
no.
I do,
That's
and you
what's-
can do greater works than even I.
And that's so important, is that one person
What
can't
what
do
what
it.
a
It's not about
universal
one.
injustice
I
that
mean,
only one
it's just
person could
crazy.
achieve
It's
that.
not about that. It's about everybody.
Right.
And we all are one, and we're all part of that one.
That's correct.
But certainly, his teachings were a reminder, as he says, of who you are, that it's not enough to follow the Christ. You must become the Christ, because that is our potential consciousness, Christ consciousness. And of course, those in power didn't want that.
Yeah.
But the church then, of course, when it came along and saw what was going on with the Christian movement, Jesus was wonderful to take hold of and transform him into a God. Well, we're all gods, we're all divine, but he was the only God.
Right.
And then that Christianity was the only true religion. That's any time one hears that there's a religion, that the only one, there's something wrong.
Right. Immediately.
But there he was as a God outside of us. When he was teaching, when you drink from my mouth, you and I are one, because we know the same things. And the church then truly distorted that. That's another inverted myth. And again, we are nothing. We are less. We must be saved. We must follow. And we will tell you what Jesus wants you to do.
Yeah. And so let's talk about that, because again, I think to give the listeners just a very deeper understanding. So you have this great man that, after his death and resurrection, left his mark on people and the disciples, and so much that the teaching really starts to spread all throughout the empire. And it comes to a point almost 300 years after his death where the empire is about to fracture, right? Because these Christians are multiplying and the word is spreading. And at that time, the Roman Empire was a polytheistic empire. Poly meaning many, theo meaning God. So they had many gods. They took a part of almost very similar to the Greek pantheon, where they had gods for different aspects of their reality. And so then it's Constantine, I believe, around 316 AD. He has a vision, right, and decides he wants to merge both Christianity and sort of this paganism, and decides is to bring out the now Holy Roman, sort of Catholic religion. And then this begins the process of the canon, right? He has the Nicene Council that he puts together with all the religious leaders of the empire, and decides that he is going to dictate what goes in and what goes out. And all based on, again, control, because that's what empires do. Can you shed a little bit of your understanding as to that specific time period?
Well, I think you've pretty much said it.
Okay.
Is that there was just an attempt to destroy what the true teaching was, and that was for our evolution. That was no longer an issue. It was now switched over to your submission and our control.
That's right.
And I think that many people, just as now, they believe a narrative and they support it without really understanding
Right.
what this really means for our whole species. But there were always those, the mystic Christians. There were those who were in mystery schools who always knew that this is a symbolic story. And while Jesus, I think, now was historical,
Sure.
he also lived a life of many of the mystics, that they did go through, in reality, a death of the old and an actual resurrection into a new being, in which the body, the cells, the structure were all different. It's a very profound thing that is pretty much undercover too. But there were always those who knew.
Yeah.
But they were the worst enemies of the church.
Well,
the heretics.
and exactly. So then you have this establishment of this empire religion, and that happens around 318 AD. But there were still these mystics. There were still these strands of individuals that understood the deeper meaning and the deeper teachings.
Understood. And they continued to practice, but they had to be careful. But it wasn't until Theodosius. Later, in the 390s.
390 AD.
And that it made it the only religion.
That's correct.
And so then there was, books, you couldn't even have books, you couldn't do rituals, you couldn't say things. It was a real censorship and control, a real horrific kind of thing, which people are still seeking today. But that, we have to recognize, is the disease of the left brain, that will always seek control.
Yeah.
Because it's like an alcoholic who's not in control of or doesn't have access to certain things because of the addiction, will want to control because, and that's just a symptom. But the interesting thing was with these mystics, they did continue quietly, underground, whatever. But Paul, in the beginning, was evidently not the Paul that we know. No. I think he's been changed a lot.
Yeah.
But he had a vision, and he knew that that's what this was all about, was inner change, total transformation. And when he went to Greece, there was a person called Dionysus Areopagite. And he says, he heard Paul. It was like Paul was on fire. And Dionysus had been initiated into many of the ancient mysteries, so he was part of that. And he saw that Paul was. And so they together formed a bond. Paul went back to the Mediterranean area to teach, and Dionysus' teaching spread throughout Europe. And so it was in France, by the time the High Middle Ages broke into the High Renaissance, they were influenced by that mystic tradition of Christianity.
So that's how that thing kept moving down the European side of things.
It was always underground, the true Christ, the true teachings. And we'll talk about High Middle Ages later. But
well, let me color that in for everybody a little bit. So you got 318, you got Constantine. They create this new religion for the empire. And then it wasn't until 390 where Theodotus essentially looks at the remainder of these Christians who are, you could say, sort of the Gnostic version of it, the Essene tradition. They were holding the original teachings of Yeshua. And because they understood that divinity was inside of us, the emperor decides to get rid of them, right? Because they were what you would consider like an emperor cult almost, where they believed at that time the emperor was the conduit from God to the people. And so if you imagine if that's what they believed, that they were the true conduits, and these Christians over here are saying, no, everybody is a conduit. We're all divine. That was an immediate opposition. You can't control that. And so they end up getting rid of that last portion of them. And that was about 390 AD. And so now, any literature, anything that was in opposition to the empire with the greatest military force that had existed up until that point, you didn't stand a chance. So, and I have sort of moved myself to that time period and like, what would I have done? What would I have done? Knowing what I know about what our true potential as a human is, that this empire is literally working on keeping us completely in the dark. Like a lot of those mystics, I would have died for that, to save our humanity or to ensure that the truth could live on. And how are you going to do it? Well, you're going to go underground.
Exactly. Yes, you have to be smart.
Yeah.
And knowing how to get information to others without being killed.
Yeah. And so now you imagine this stream of knowledge going underground because the emperor and the empire was so strong at that time. And then we go through the Dark Ages at that point, around 500 AD, where imagine, that right side of our brain is where our creativity is, all the different ways that our mythos and the spiritual world communicates. And all of a sudden you get a novel idea that, that the earth isn't the center of the universe. And you start talking about it and saying, hey, I got this great revelation, off with your head. This is not, it doesn't fit within this religious book. And so anything that doesn't fit immediately would get
It's
buried out, killed, tortured, burned at the stake.
Burned. Oh, many burned. But I just wanted to
Yes,
mention
please.
quickly that the Deuteronomists knew what they were doing about that, of closing down the right brain, because they forbade any image to be made. And remember in Genesis,
Sure.
any images above in the firmament or below in the ocean or anywhere on the earth, no image can be made, not of God, not of anything. Art was out. Well, once you do that, you have blocked off the symbolic language of the right brain and spirit. And
Wow.
there was another point to be made that Jews began reading earlier, probably than most in the area, and that's a linear process that does shift us to the left brain. And when I had a child, I was listening very much to Joseph Chilton Pearson and the Eastern tradition about give the child time to live in the right brain. Don't push immediately. And mothers would always, I had to kind of stay away from mothers because they were always bragging about how their children could read. And I was trying to keep mine from it. Just keep him in the pictures, allow him to feel the images, see the images, and work with that and allow that to develop. But this is exactly what the Deuteronomists wanted to destroy, and they did.
Yeah, they did a great job at it. So now we go into the dark period there for quite some time, almost like 700 years, between almost like 500 to about 1200. And I would like to continue on with this sort of like first Renaissance, if you will, because, it's like the truth will always come to the light. It will always come to the light. It's just a matter of timing. And so all of a sudden, you have about the 1100s, 1200s around this time where the truth began to want to emerge, but the empire still had a hold. And so the individuals had to get creative, and they had to share it within a story, within a myth, right? And this is where now we get sort of the Arthurian legends and the Holy Grail legend and this story that codes a deeper truth.
That's true. The High Middle Ages isn't even considered a Renaissance. Only Renaissance is the Italian. And in the book, I show four Renaissance periods, and this is the fifth. But the High Middle Ages was an incredible Renaissance period in which there was just, first of all, I think in the human psyche, we know something's missing.
Yeah.
I've had so many people write to me and say, I've been looking for these missing pieces all my life. And
So I'm not alone.
No, we all were doing that. And so that's what happened during the High Middle Ages, that I think the psyche was just longing for those pieces. What's wrong? Something's missing. But they had that's the inner story. The outer world is that, of course, that the Islam was growing.
Sure.
And it actually had, by this time, circled around 700. They had great civilizations circling all the southern part of Europe. And Baghdad was a place of great learning and wisdom, men and women working together. They even could translate some of the hieroglyphics, because we always took, credit for that much, much later. But they had a high civilization, and many of the underground people who had been running from Christianity ended up in Baghdad and Persia. So here was all of this movement there, but it had also gone all the way to Spain and into Cordova, which was the great center for Islamic learning, Christian learning, and Jewish learning.
Wow.
So there they all worked together. It was a real Renaissance, and I'll say the roots of the European Renaissance.
Yeah.
But people would come from all over Europe to hear these people. They worked together in peace, and that was a powerful, powerful igniter. But, as you point out, they needed stories. And Ireland had not been taken over by the Roman Church. They still had some of their original stories. And they began to flood into Wales and England and then over into the continent. And of course, they were being changed all the time by the human psyche, you know, adding more, seeing it this way, that way. And so these bards took it all over Europe to the courts and sang these stories. So the stories of love and physical love, bringing back, because Christianity had been, you know, the body was outcast. Nature was
no pleasure. It's like
no,
a very
it wasn't a pleasure culture at all. It was a shame culture, and not only the human body but all of nature was to be exploited because it was nothing. And I mean, had no soul, had no nothing, as they would say. And so all of this came back. Nature with the sacred wells and the waterfalls and the forests, and people would go there and they'd find these sacred places where the energy really was conducive to going into an altered state. So they were rediscovering everything that had been suppressed. And of course, at the center of it all was the feminine dimension of the divine. And it was symbolized as a female. And all of the knights were seeking her. And during that time, too, men even began to wear a little bit more of women's clothing.
Skirts and
I mentioned before about chess. They changed to make the feminine.
That was an interesting piece, that the chessboard, you know, sort of evolved to have the queen become the strongest on the board at that time. That's interesting.
And I've told this story many times, but it's so worth telling.
Please.
Is that I guess it was Gawain, Sir Gawain married. It's should I tell it?
Yeah, please.
And I love the story because he married the most beautiful woman anywhere. And so, they celebrated in court. It was just wonderful. The wedding was fantastic. And they went back to the room at night alone together. And suddenly she became the ugliest, the most horrendous hag you can imagine. And he was, of course, horrified. And she said, you know, Gawain, I can be this at night when I'm with you, or I can be beautiful with you. But then I would have to be ugly at court. I'd have to be the hag in court and not beautiful. Which do you choose? And the whole point of the story is that finally the male learns, oh, my lady, the choice is yours. That finally he would listen to the right brain and the heart. And then, of course, she was beautiful everywhere. It's a beautiful story,
gorgeous story, yes.
I love it.
That's beautiful. Yeah, and you know, obviously then, you know, because you mentioned about the Knights of the Round Table. And so for those listening, anytime you hear a myth, it's a part of the mythos. And the mythos is a part of sort of our education that's for the soul, if you will. And these stories, these mythologies, these legends, they're coded. And so you got to sort of penetrate them a bit to extract the wisdom that's latent within the words. So, you know, what Betty's mentioning is that the Knights of the Round Table were the bravest, loyal, you know, sort of most courageous individuals who would sit at this round table. That also is symbolic of, you know, just being equal and whole and immortal in the circle and eternal. But they go out into the forest to find the Holy Grail. And so the Holy Grail in Latin means Santa Sangreal, which means royal bloodline. And so they go out in search of this Holy Grail, this royal bloodline, which is really just indicative of the soul. You know, we are of royal descent. And so what these knights were doing is they were going through the forest to essentially arrive to save their soul in so many ways. And so they go through that forest, and that's also a metaphor where these knights go through trials, tribulation, initiations. And if they succeed in this quest of, you know, going through these trials with enough time and enough effort, they then arrive to the Grail Castle, right? And in the Grail Castle, they meet the angelic individual who is holding this Holy Grail. And the only way to activate this power within the Holy Grail is they have to ask the right question, right? And it's, how can I serve the Grail? right? How can I best be a service to this holy grail, this soul of ours? And when we ask that question, it activates the power within the soul, right? To be in service, to be generous, and in my estimation too, the Grail Castle is the arrival into the heart. But first you have to go through those trials, those tribulations. You have to heal enough so you can actually make the descent from this left brain into the right brain, into the heart. And when you arrive into that heart, you can ask that question, and then that activates sort of that latent potential. And that Holy Grail is our soul. So it's those who are the most courageous and who are willing to go through the forest of your own life to face the trials and the initiations that you can activate the full presence of the soul.
Yes, and when Parsifal, I think, is the one who
Yes.
arrives there, when he arrives there, he sees the wounded king.
That's right.
Because this is the metaphor for what's
Yes.
behind King Arthur in the
course.
physical world. Here is the symbolic world. And there he is deeply wounded in the thigh, which is the genital
Yes.
area, so he cannot create.
That's right.
And the question that is embedded in how can I serve thee is first, what ails thee? What ails thee is the essential first question, because he cannot serve until he knows what ails the king.
I love that.
And he doesn't ask the question, so the castle disappears.
That's right.
And he at least has some insight, which is true with most of us.
Sure.
We get an insight and then boom, we're back.
Yeah, square one.
And there he is. But once the question is asked, we're told that we've entered the labyrinth.
Yeah.
And now we really realize that the forest is a labyrinth. It is our structure for our journey, and each event will be what our soul needs to awaken in itself. And so he had the chance, but he didn't know enough at that point.
Sure.
And that's okay. You know, he is still on the journey, and when he wakes up and the castle's gone, there is a woman there who helps him.
Yeah. And then the story then activates itself. So, but that I thought it would be good for the readers to share. That story was, again, a recollection of this sort of ancient tradition, which was to reclaim the soul, to live from the soul, to reclaim our own, internal feminine in so many ways. And that lasted for about 50 years, you write about in the book, where these bards and this initial uprising sort of takes hold through Europe. But then it gets submerged again.
Yes, Jessie Weston does a wonderful work on that, and she sees precisely that it's the church that does it.
Yeah.
But yes, this was, I like what you've said about the soul when they come there, because of course there is no soul when we're left brain.
Yeah.
If we see what's going on and has gone on in the world, you cannot do that if you have any connection to the heart. And the right brain gives you that connection with the symbolic language, but the heart opens you to the heart of others. So yes, he finds out in that castle what is missing, and he then remains in the search for it. So I have in the book that the High Middle Ages around 1000. Those dates are always arbitrary because 12,000 is what is usually, 1200
Right.
is usually what is given. But I say 1000 because in Chartres, there was a phenomenal thing taking place. Of course, they were in touch with Cordova, and they also were in touch with the Dionysian teachings, but Plato and Aristotle. So at Chartres Cathedral, before it was built, there was a cathedral, a church there. And there were some very unusual people there. I mean, brilliant people who had the initiates in the church. They taught them all of the left brain knowledge of the day, but they also initiated them into soul. They knew that they were the ones who realized soul is missing.
Yeah.
Soul is missing. How do we ignite? How do we get in touch with our soul again? And so there were actual initiations. They achieved these higher states of consciousness. And they knew that their questions were, how do we heal the soul? How do we heal our culture? And how do we heal the world? And later, when Chartres Cathedral came in, this was even intensified because the labyrinth, the forest, was brought right into the structure of these great cathedrals.
That's right. They were showing that labyrinth in the cathedrals.
And I was interested to realize that the oldest image of a labyrinth was found in Malta in Siberia, 2600 BCE.
Wow.
Yeah, and it's during the Neolithic period after the Upper Paleolithic. It was just dominant throughout the Neolithic period. It was dominant, and if you go to Greece, they dance the circular spiral dance as a part of the labyrinthine dance.
Yeah, even the Sufis and the way that they dance and the sort of that spiral.
It's beautiful. And the Hungarian scholar, who was a classical scholar, Karl Karányi, I think he said so beautifully that what we do is, and we'll remember these are in many of the churches during the High Middle Ages, is that this is initiation rite, and that when you walk the labyrinth, you're walking toward your own soul, and you go around and around and down until you're in the depths of who you are. I love that. You're at the mind of God.
That's right.
The divine mind. And you understand that this is not other, but self. This is the great realization when you actually do it. You understand what you were to understand with symbolic tree is that you are at the center, at the heart, and you realize that you are the divine mind. And Keith Critchlow has done so much on the megalithic structure and architecture and the Gothic cathedrals, all of the Gothic cathedrals, that at that point, when you look up, when you're at the center, you look up and you're at the center of the rose window where Mary is holding the Christ child.
That's right.
Which is Christ consciousness. And these early scholars had already pointed out and had established their initiation practices were called the Mary, M-A-R-Y, mysteries. So at that labyrinth, when you reach the heart, the soul, and the Sufis say the heart is the organ of soul, you look up and you see Mary holding the Christ child. She has given birth to the Christ as you have given birth to the Christ within you.
Yeah, that's just absolutely gorgeous.
That's mystic Christianity.
Yeah, that's mystic Christianity right there. I could feel that. Oh, yeah. I cannot wait to visit that cathedral, and I've read much about it. I've seen the labyrinth and heard that, as you get to the center, that you get that sort of symbolic image of.
And the Gothic cathedrals themselves. I mean, the great builders are part of a secret society that has existed. We don't even know when they began. They existed in Egypt for sure.
Had to
because those temples actually transformed you when you walked into them. But these builders continued underground, and their knowledge was passed on, and it was those builders, the builders of these great temples that could transform us when we went in. And the Gothic cathedral is built in a way that it can trigger transformation. It has all of the elements and characteristics of a transformative vessel that after it was done, no one knew where these great stained glass artists had gone or the great architects. I mean, there's so much mystery
there with those builders. Yeah, it is interesting.
And Fulcanelli said that these cathedrals are the alembic, the alchemical alembic, and that's exactly what the great builders built it to be.
Wow.
So that was understood that if you had the right rituals, that you could achieve that within these structures.
Within the structure.
And it was built on a sacred spot,
Well,
a sacred water wells where the Druids were.
And on top of ley lines and so forth. I read some interesting literature on, I think it was called Grail Bound and Grail Found. But they talked about those ley lines and those cathedrals being built specifically on those so that the energy within them already was transformative in nature. And then with sort of these initiation rites that were embedded within the structure and the geometry and all that.
Exactly.
It was like you're going into a shamanic ceremony immediately in through the temple.
It is such a structure with the sacred water, the sacred electromagnetic energies of the earth, and the cosmos, the alignment with the stars.
Yeah.
And the human body itself, as Freddie Silva says
Sure.
so well,
Yeah,
is
he
an
does.
aggregate of the field.
Yeah.
So if you go for that purpose and your intention is
Mm-hmm.
that, then the intention is magnified in the field and will come back to you. But with the structure, it's possible to do it more easily.
Yeah, and it makes great sense on why the Catholic Church was so rigorous about getting rid of astrology, you know, and sort of this idea that astrologists and that they were of the devil and of evil, but yet all the great megalithic sites, they were all astrologically around the world, and so this was ancient wisdom that they held. And but to be in a temple like that, I mean, you can feel it immediately if you're attuned to energy and you go in with that intention. You go in and there's an activation that occurs.
And I think of Black Elk in his writings said that when we were given square houses to live in, just put anywhere, we knew we would die because they took us out of our round tents and our sacred land. And we knew nothing about these things. And everybody was savage except us, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And when they came to America, to the Americas, there was had been great civilizations here.
Oh, of course.
And we called them savage and of the devil. We were pathetically ignorant.
Yeah.
Many of us, unfortunately.
Sure.
But we're waking up.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of it. So, so we're around, this second sort of time period. The Renaissance comes. There's another revival. It's the Italian Renaissance that happens first. After
it's the first one after the great
Grail legends and that
Grail
first
legends and the High Middle Ages.
Yes.
Then that it's about 100 and some years, and then the Italian Renaissance, and that was an awakening of every aspect of our lives.
Right, and that was seemed to be what's interesting, because obviously I want to eventually get to this idea of this, the merchants and so forth, but it was really the merchants were at the sort of they were there at the beginning of this Renaissance, because they were the funders of the architects and the artists and the the sculptors and so forth, and said, hey, we need to sort of break out of the mold of the church here.
That's so important. I'm so glad you bring that up, because it truly was the merchant that gave these people the freedom to paint nature, to paint the human body, to do something different, and of course to go to other places. Yeah,
and to spread that. And so they were there. I'm obviously in the process of writing the first book on the rebirth of the merchant, but the second one will be with the age of patronism. Where it's going to be speaking about the fact that these merchants who now sort of remember who they are and what we come to do, that we will become sort of the creators of the new Renaissance.
Yes, because that's right. And when merchants really evolved, I guess, in the Italian Renaissance period, they were getting out of a different kind of system. Yeah. And it was probably huge thing to even think about having a business and being able to do something other than
on your own without
on their own. And it's taken a long time, hasn't it, to say, wait a minute, we need to go back for the grail. Yeah.
And that's where we come in, with giving business soul and bringing back to human awareness, as is this archetype of the merchant. And so, but I don't want to kind of get ahead of myself. So then this time period comes, and I think what you wrote in the book was fantastic. And this idea that, the truth has been trying to come out, and it has it's sort of surfaced itself multiple times, given us sufficient data and information to now take in. But it really isn't about, and it was sort of preparation. I believe that this truth couldn't actually root itself and take hold until we moved out of maybe the completion of the great year. The great year being this 26,000 year cycle of time that we just completed. It felt to me that Yeshua sort of planted the seed about 2,000 years ago, and that this was gestating, germinating, however you want to call it. And it's made, multiple attempts to sort of break ground. And it's not until now where you and I agree wholeheartedly in the sense like it's now the time, right? That this wisdom, this understanding, this knowledge that had been erased or tried to have been, hidden from us is really now taking hold. And you mentioned in the book that it's multiple reasons of why this time will work, right? Where in the past, again, you still are fighting against old structures and paradigms and so forth. But now we have a deeper understanding of many things, including, quantum, mechanics and quantum science and, our understanding of just having information from books that were hidden and lost. And all of this is now coalescing itself, and getting ready, I believe, for its final rise and the one that really takes hold. So can you share a little bit about that, your perspective as to why this time that this knowledge and this truth is coming out, why it will take hold?
Well, there's some things that we need to go back and pick up.
Okay, let's do that.
Can we do that?
Please.
Okay. After the Italian Renaissance, then just there were so many forces that were in existence that it went underground again.
Yeah.
And the church was responsible for that.
Again.
And I always like to use Pico della Mirandola as an example of that because he was so brilliant. He was a young man in his 20s. He wrote the 900 Theses, which was about how all spiritual traditions are at root about soul, heart, the same.
Wow.
And so, and let me tell a little bit about his intellect. I just can't even imagine it. He knew about 7 languages, and he could read something, and then after having read it once, he could recite the whole thing.
Wow.
Now this is really strange. He could recite it backwards.
Oh, wow.
Now I don't understand that. No one else did either. But he was just brilliant. He was young, but he did see. He saw this that of course Europe was forbidden to see, and he didn't have the diplomacy he might have had he been older, but then had he been older, he might have been afraid. So he went to Rome to get the 900 Theses printed, and he was going to have a conference and call these great leaders around Europe to come and talk about this. This would have been an exciting, explosive time. But the church then caught on to what he was doing, and they said, no, you will not print this. You will not have these speakers here. He was going to have it in Rome.
Right in front of it.
And as a matter of fact, they put him in jail.
Yeah.
And he was poisoned by someone in his late 20s. He didn't. But he saw, especially Kabbalah, he said, well, this is mystic Christianity.
Yeah, it totally is.
And so it looked as though it didn't go anywhere, that these underground traditions had come up, like, oh, here's a chance, and then they had to go back underground. And yet, just a little bit later, the English Renaissance, influenced by the Italian, took place. And it was, as we know, magnificent. That's the one we kind of knew more about.
Yeah.
And there were people there, and I'm finding out now that there was a much deeper underground working with this tradition than I had been aware of before. So Pico's work on the connection of Kabbalah and Christianity, or the similarities, was picked up by several writers, and it went to England, and then it was really taken in by the likes of Bacon and John Dee and Francis Bacon and others. And there was a whole group of brilliant scientists, mathematicians, spiritual seekers who worked with the ideas that actually emerged from the High Middle Ages to the Italian Renaissance into England, and it was called Rosicrucian.
Yes.
And then that began to spread in the 1500s throughout Europe. And John Dee was especially important, but he was so intimately connected with Francis Bacon and the whole Shakespearean phenomenon. And here with these incredible creators who thought they can create a world through education and initiation and change the world. And so Dee then traveled throughout Europe and had great influence on the coming third Renaissance, which would take place in Prague, but it also was in Germany. They would come from London to Heidelberg, and there were those in Heidelberg. I mean, it was actually a Renaissance already taking place in Heidelberg, and so he was very influential there. And then Friedrich of Heidelberg becomes very important with his wife Elizabeth, who is James' daughter, and they all thought that James would support the Protestant endeavor. It was restrictive too, but it was much more open than the Catholic. So they thought, oh, we can do this. So they were really hopeful that movement into Heidelberg and then into Prague, Old Bohemia, where Ferdinand had been, he's Catholic, yes, but he was open to all this. So the underground, all of these people from the Kabbalists, the alchemists, the Hermeticists, and mystic Christians, they were in Prague. And they were real scientists and mathematicians. And as the one who is doing American Code,
Alan Green.
Alan Green, points out that he was their cryptologist and mathematician, how he worked out all of that. And this is interesting because why did they have to have all of that?
Right.
They had to make it so that no one knew what they were doing except the ones who were part of it.
Who were initiated in it.
Initiated into it. And so the initiates spread that. But there were books being published and publishers were going from London to Heidelberg to Prague. It was like, the 60s maybe.
Yeah, exactly. It just feels like, wow.
Everybody was
just a real renaissance.
And they were saying, now is the time.
Now is the time.
The time to do it. And certainly they said it then, and then later at the German Renaissance they did. And we're seeing it today, and I hope we have more evidence today.
Yeah.
But at any rate, so there it was, Prague. These men, and mainly men, there were a lot of women with
for
them.
Sure.
But, they were the ones who could move about and work and be in positions. Mathematicians,
learned men, just individuals, is a great intellect and soul.
They're so beyond what we knew, that we, like the Enochian language that John Dee came up, we don't even know what he's talking about.
Yeah.
So we just dismiss him.
Yeah.
And of course, that's what happened. They dismissed these people as they became known as quacks. But powerful scientific and mystical work was being done from London, Heidelberg, Prague. And then Protestants were thinking, okay, this is looking good. Rudolph is dying, others there, but let's get our man in. Let's get Friedrich in. And it was, they're up against Catholic Church.
Sure, yeah.
Sort of like Pico,
Yeah.
But they decided, and Friedrich and Elizabeth decided they would do it. They got him in as king of Prague.
Wow.
Of Bohemia. So they're called the Winter King and Queen. That's all they lasted. The church found out and went in and wiped it out.
Wow. And this is what year? So what year are we in?
Well, 1600 was when this really became strong throughout Europe. But it was the 1500s, England, over the 1600s in Europe, in Heidelberg and Prague, and throughout.
The Winter King and Queen, though, when did that?
Oh, the King and Queen. Oh, well, it was the winter, so it was in 1620. 1620, when they went in and they spent a winter as king and queen, and then the Habsburgs with the church moved in. They weren't killed; they went to the Netherlands. Everything and all of the work that this underground tradition. Of course, I'm sure they got everything they could because they knew what would happen.
Oh, of course.
But they destroyed. Like in Heidelberg, they threw out papers, scripts, manuscripts, everything into the street, and it was just awful.
Yeah. And
Heidelberg was a beautiful Renaissance city. It was nothing after that. And Prague was destroyed. So, however, they were very smart. They went underground, once again, of course.
Sure.
And, of course, Germany had been alive with it. Well, that was still there. So that was 1620. There was the 30 Years' War, Protestants fighting against Catholics. People were killed, so many people. I have read that half of German towns, half of the population was wiped out in some cases. It was awful. And people knew the power of the church after that. So everybody was pretty meek and obedient. And so here, the roots of science are in these mystic underground traditions. So it emerges in 1660 in England, in London. It's the organization for the Society for the Advancement of Science. Everybody knows you can only study matter because the church
Right.
will allow no mysticism.
None.
That's the heretic. No inner, nothing inner. Just, and of course they're killing themselves because
Yeah.
they say just matter. And
Yeah.
so, but and some of these people, some of them, these people were a part of that underground tradition that were in it, but they knew that whatever they did, it had to be coded.
Yeah.
Or it had to be written in a way that no one would know.
Yeah.
And they did. They were, now that was earlier, of course, they knew at that time. And then later in the 1600s, they still knew that this was even more serious.
Right.
So science then became a material science. And that's so powerful horribly powerful, because we know this is why we have had this horrible worldview,
Right.
that there's nothing but matter.
Yeah.
Well, that's all they could study. Of course, they couldn't discover
course.
anything else. And there's nothing but matter. We are a fluke of nature.
Yeah.
There's no purpose, no meaning.
Random.
And when you're dead, you're dead. Everything that's the opposite of the tree of life.
Yeah.
Everything that's opposite of the truth.
Yeah.
And then, on top of that, France came in with the French philosophers of the so-called Enlightenment.
That's right.
Well, the Enlightenment was going to be during that third revolution. That was not only an enlightenment for Europe, it was an enlightenment for the entire world. And they were brilliant. They knew that you cannot have science without mysticism,
Of course not.
without spirituality. And they are the ones who gave mathematics to the scientists who we praise as being, no, they got it from the underground.
Of course.
So there we were, but that had been in Germany, hadn't it? So Germany is still, it's even by the time of Goethe, so that 1670 was the Science Society, 1620 Prague was destroyed in Heidelberg, 1670 the scientists, and in the late 1600s and 1700s, the French philosophers who were saying, there's only the left brain. They didn't call it that, but there's only reason we have reached the apex of it all. All of that other stuff, myth, and so we don't need any more. And here was Germany. So Goethe went to university to study law because his father wanted him to, and he was miserable. And he literally came home and he said, I don't want to study that. And his mother knew a woman who was a pietist who really was a Rosicrucian because pietism is a part of Rosicrucianism.
I see.
So underground, this had remained, this alchemical, hermetic, mystic tradition. And so he studied with a woman who was a pietist, and he became a great European alchemist himself.
Yes,
of course, there were these alchemists still carrying on underground. And then Novalis came later, and he saw Goethe's writings, and he became then very much convinced. So they called this new tradition, it was actually to get in touch with the right brain and the heart. They called it the new mythology, which was really, so that, the Merry Mysteries, the new mythology, alchemy, whatever, the great work was achieving a consciousness of who we are. And so that was reborn in the German Romantic period and then in England again. So there again, England and Germany, they knew because it was in their roots.
Yeah.
But, and Germany was just a tremendous resistor. I mean, it absolutely resisted this kind of domination. And the French philosophers, that's all there is, and material science. But they failed. Material science won, and they went underground.
This is the
And
fourth underground or third.
Again, yeah.
Yeah.
That's the fourth, the
Fourth.
fourth Renaissance. So now, with your question, we come
Yes.
to the fifth Renaissance. So we've lived in a world in which we've told our children the material myth is that you're really nothing. And it doesn't matter what you do. There's no purpose, no meaning. You can't bring children up with that. There's no way the heart will allow it. So you become a drug addict or a serial killer, or you don't give a damn about anything, and you exploit
all
the
sorts
earth.
of pathologies, all sorts of pathologies that you take on.
All sorts of terrible
without
things. You
the soul.
exploit nature, you exploit business. There's no soul in the business. I always thought, even when I was younger, I thought when people were ready to cheat you, they would say, don't take it personally, it's just business. Like, it's okay to be that way in business? Well, certainly no soul. So it's, no wonder we have children who are so damaged. No wonder we are damaged.
Yeah.
With that, we cannot live like that because that's not who we are, but that's where we are. Okay, so what happens in the 20th century? In the 20s, quantum physics begins to develop, but nobody knows quite what it's all about.
Right.
But these physicists thought, there's something going on here that we didn't know. So they start reading mystics.
Yeah. Yeah.
But they can't put it together for about 50 years.
Sure.
And then scientists around the world start doing experiments, and separately they start discovering, oh my God, and they discover, of course, that there's a multidimensional world, that our consciousness has access to it, and that there is, well, especially, not all quantum physicists know this, but there were so many who saw this is not the science we knew, and many of them went to South America, worked with ayahuasca, worked in various ways.
Sure.
Or like Fitjof Capra in Santa Barbara, he was out on the beach and suddenly he had a vision that was exactly the physics he knew, but it was living right there. He saw it in reality. And I think he might have used sacred medicine at that time. So sacred medicine, here these quantum mathematicians use sacred medicine too.
Sure.
And they realized they could put the quantum physics together with soul. And so that is one of the reasons that we might make it, because science, this dreadful, dreadful myth of nothingness has been our myth.
Right.
And it's shattered. That isn't true. We know it isn't true. And now we have a science that allows us to explore and become who we really are. So that's a major reason. Another big thing that happened was that independently, these researchers began to find the roots of our cultures that knew that, that they found the shaman mystic traditions. And I really stay with the West because the East had kept much of that.
Yes, of course.
But the West really had to go through a terrible time of being forced into the left brain. And of course, if you were intelligent, you believed the science, right?
Of course.
So it was just, you couldn't even say anything in university that would be otherwise. And I remember when I was at University of California, Irvine, with Yeats and the visions that Yeats had. They did everything they could to make that nonsensical.
Wow. You must have been such a rebel.
Well,
because I feel like I've been a rebel, and it's only really been 20 years where I've been languaging these things. And it's like, I imagine you going through school and the academic world. It's like, and with your understanding and trying to bring that forward.
Well, it's like everybody, you're learning all the time. And I listened to that and I had my own ideas, but I didn't say too much because it would. But when I did my dissertation, I did it on old Europe, which was one of those cultures. Throughout Europe, for thousands of years, there's no evidence of war, and the symbolism is incredibly joyful, and the labyrinth is everywhere. So, but when I did my dissertation, I did it on that culture, and a little bit about what I carried it further in that. But it was a painful time, and all students who go back who want soul find universities painful because they can't say anything.
Sure.
I think there are universities, different types, they're springing up where you can, and that's wonderful, but we've got to move to help universities be more open and see the evidence that's available as in death. There is so much evidence that consciousness continues.
Sure.
That one has to be blind to say it isn't there or just doesn't do the research. So I think we're moving in that direction. So research not only in quantum physics, but in all of the experiences, near-death experiences, or bedside experiences, or the visions that people are having now, and also the anomalous things like what was called UFOs. The experiences people have had, the research that's gone into that, crop circles.
Right.
We know the difference between the ones that are made by people, but we also know the other things and all of the events that circle around them. So there are those things, and I think the indigenous people have said
another element. Sure.
It's now time to release our knowledge to you before they knew they couldn't do it because we couldn't understand anything and we destroy it and call it savage. But now they said, now is the time. They are saying, now is the time.
Yeah.
And releasing that knowledge. So I have in the book some of those traditions, our own native people here, and also those in the high Sierras, the
Hopis.
The Hopis here, yes. And I'm trying to think in the high Sierras. Can't think of the name right now. How strange. But at any rate, they were people that Columbus, or the people following Columbus, could never discovered.
Sure.
And they have a long and powerful tradition of mysticism and shamanism, and that those who become shamans are trained, I think 10 years, and without being out in the world.
Wow.
And then the others are trained 10 more years, and they never enter everyday life there in the high Sierras, and they know exactly what's coming and what's happening. And they say, we don't learn from books. We have no books. They have no books there. But that they learn from the quantum field. They learn from spirit.
From spirit.
And they knew things about cosmology, the universe, the stars. I mean, this is just incredible what they do.
Yeah.
So there are, and of course, I have a long section on the Sand Bushmen.
That's right.
Incredible that they knew how to reach higher states of consciousness and cosmic consciousness, and they own nothing, and we just looked down on them, and they knew what we didn't know at all. So I think it's a time when indigenous people are releasing their knowledge to us, because these people in the high Sierras said it's time.
It's time.
Because younger brother is destroying the planet.
Yeah.
And so those are the ones I think of right now. Can you think of other reasons?
Well, I mean, I was going to bring up, the Mayan culture and what they spoke about in, the crossing of this chasm in 2012, where science and spirituality would find common language, where East and West would finally come together, where the masculine and feminine would come into union. And so it certainly feels that post-2012, we've been in an accelerated process here because of all these things that you just mentioned are literally coalescing simultaneously as we complete the great year, a 26,000 year cycle of time. I mean, we can clearly see what's happening on the global stage with everything going on. It's like we're entering in this birth pang, it's like this new earth, this new consciousness is emerging. And, just like in a birthing room, you have contractions and expansions, and
we've been having them for a long time.
Yes, it's been some time.
That's a good metaphor, by the way. That's very good. It definitely is.
And it's coming through us, and it feels to me that for those of us that are in exploration of knowing ourselves, doing the work of the soul and activating it, as more and more people begin to sort of separate themselves out of the illusion of what's been going on and start to venture into themselves. And we start to do the deep work. We start to do the shadow work. Another thing that we didn't mention, I think was really relevant, was Carl Jung's work in mapping out sort of the unconscious and the collective unconscious, and all these elements are also highly important, because without his body of work, we would kind of be a bit lost in how to actually go in the exploration of the unconscious.
But I want to jump back to the Mayan. I should have had them in the book, in a way, because there's so many people were writing about them, though. But yes, they were one of the most advanced civilizations. Yes. And I'm so amazed that my friends can go to Mexico, to these places, or Central America and South America, and they see these things, but they don't realize this is something incredible. These were magnificent civilizations.
Magnificent.
And the Mayan were just so advanced mathematically.
Right, astronomically.
Yes, and that we've just sort of found out about them in the 20th century.
Yeah.
So that was another one of the, and people are doing their, expanding, like what I did. They're doing other. We're all doing. And we kind of bring it all together. Well,
I think we're just weaving a big tapestry, and we all have been selected to do the work that we're here to do, to stay in our lane, continue to do that, and then we'll coalesce. We'll weave together with other who are a part of this fractal, others who are looking to bring truth out into the light. And I think that that's, we were talking about that before we got started with the podcast. It's like the moment I met you, it was an immediate affinity because it was, well, one, I just felt obviously with all the work you've done and certainly a giant in consciousness, it was here. How is it that I'm writing a book entitled Giving Business Soul, the Rebirth of the Merchant, and this quest that I've been on for a decade of retrieving an archetype in consciousness. And so when I read this book, the consciousness that is changing the world, the merchants of light, I'm like, oh, Betty knows about this archetype, And so I'm obviously reading through, and you have a slightly, different component at the merchants of light. But the work that I'm doing is to resurrect this lost archetype, as Carl Jung says, right? Archetypes are stored in the collective unconscious, and they're like deep waterbeds that when the necessity for them is in our collective humanity, that they'll rise up. And I believe,
just like during these Renaissance periods.
Exactly. And Betty, I can't tell you how often, I'm in my events and I'm speaking at the summits and doing this thing. I'm like, we are in the Renaissance. Yeah. That's been the language that I've been using. And
that's so great.
Yeah. And I think Emerson says it really, really well. He said, something to the degree, it's like, if you're to be born, at any time in human history, would you not want to be born in the time of revolution, where the old and the new stand side by side and are okay at being compared, and it's so beautiful the way he says that, and that's where we are right now.
And he was part of that German English romantic
That's right.
revolution.
He was coming out of that time period.
Yeah.
And what a great mystic. I love Emerson's.
When I was in college, someone I hadn't seen for years said, "Oh, you were transcendentalist, weren't you?" I thought, well, I guess I was.
You're into that, yeah. But that's really where we're at right now. It's this Renaissance. And my prayer is that this one obviously takes hold. I don't think we have much more time. As I mentioned when I introduced you, your work is urgent for people to be aware of this historic timeline that we've been on. And my prayer is that in the completion of my book, and when that comes out into human awareness, that the current power structure, as I've shared with you, is that if we're going to shift a society, we have to look at who in that society has the most amount of power, right? And power is always concentrated in the biggest buildings, right? That's where you can clearly see out into the landscape and say who's got the largest buildings, and that's where the power is. You were mentioning, the time of the Protestants sort of breaking out of the Catholic Church and the Holy Roman Empire, holy in quotations. The power structure at that time was the church, and so and these individuals said, "Hey, we can transform this power structure," and obviously it wasn't going to work. And then government surfaces out, and they become the largest buildings, and obviously that's not going to shift. That's not going to change because whether you were a part of a castle and the king and the queen, or whether you were a part of the church with pope and priest, or, part of the government establishment with, politicians and presidents, those you had to belong to a bloodline to essentially participate in the power structure. And what I speak about in the book is that this is the first time in human history where the power structure is malleable. Right, because we don't have to belong to the power. We don't have to belong to a bloodline to shift that power structure. Because as entrepreneurs, if we simply bring a new consciousness into the way we operate as entrepreneurs, as business people, then we could set a new precedence. Right, when we integrate the soul into business, and which is what Giving Business Soul is all about, is to lead the entrepreneur to the healing of all the trauma that has been in our own life, as well as our lineage, so that we can come into the soul. And as that soul presence starts to become a way that we move in the world, and then the way that we show up in business, that's where we feel Giving Business Soul, we can shift things.
And make business work.
And make business work for all of us,
For all.
And so I would love to dive into that aspect, because again, the way the Merchants of Light came to you is a fascinating story. And if you'd be open to sharing
Sure.
about that process. And this is where my spidey senses and my entire body, as I'm reading the book, starts to get activated, because I'm like, wait a minute. She's describing something that I feel like I've touched, with this Merchants of Light.
Yes. Well, I had a very, very powerful vision before my mother or my son or my husband were killed in that 3-year period. It was, I had gone to South America, I'd worked with shamans, and so 3 of us were together. We had ritual, and we did use, I was the only one with sacred medicine. And it was a ritual for our children, for the healing of our children, so that the earth could be healed. And I didn't have a name for it at that time. It was light. But what happened is that my eyes were closed. We were in a circle in ritual, the 3 of us, and I saw, with my eyes closed, this very large disc of light come through the glass doors and hover over my head. And the consciousness was so powerful but I felt it just pull me up. And then out of the bottom of it, this swirled, a female being with a white satin square hat and satin to the waist. And she swirled through the crown chakra to the heart. And she began to sing. And I realized that she was like, she could sort of tone down the power of that consciousness so that I could bear it. And she sang through me, and she immediately said, "You have called us, and we are here.
Wow.
Your planet has called us, and we are here. We are the light. We are the light circling round your planet. And can you feel us?" Of course, it wasn't can the left brain pick us up, but can we feel?
Yes.
Can you feel us? And it was incredibly beautiful. At that moment, then that knowledge just some knowledge permeated me. And I knew that this light had been around the planet, as she said, for so long. So we had drawn it to the planet, but we hadn't yet anchored it in the planet. And that day was for that. And she then went into a ritual that was almost technical about how we are ready to connect to your planet. And it was strange. I didn't know what to make of that. But these two heard the voice singing, and we knew what to do. It was as though, and we just were embraced in a circle, and we felt that energy just through us and connect like anchors into the planet. And I knew at that point that this was a real change. This was something very different. We are here because you called us. It was as though they couldn't come until we called them. We were ready. But they had been there waiting light for a long time around the planet. And now it was our job to anchor that light through changing business, through the merchants, and through soul, and through so many other ways. And that was so powerful that after it was over, my body was I had to just lie in the floor.
Yeah.
And one of the two others, she was a large woman. It was great because she could just put her arms around. She just held me for probably an hour before I could actually sit up and kind of get back to normal. So that was, I went on a sabbatical to Europe after that, and all the way I thought, because I still didn't know, I was still doubting and didn't know, and I thought, okay, there's no way you could make that up. That was so powerful, so outside your ability to come up. And it was so filled with love. And she said, "You have joined to yourselves this day all those on your planet who are creating worlds of love and joy and peace.
Wow. Wow.
And we will come together as we can do work together." And that was very, very powerful. Then after our son died, and we were in contact with his consciousness, my husband and I, and as I said, Istvan was not one. He was a businessman he was a good soul.
Sure.
And he did business the best he could with souls to survive. But he wasn't interested in what I was interested in.
So
But
he had no real like spirituality,
no,
energy, just
he
kind of
just
like
loved
Betty
and was
does her
deeply
thing.
intuitive,
Yeah.
a good person. But he tolerated what I wanted to do.
He
and-
supported and tolerated.
yeah,
And,
but I tried to tell him about a vision I'd had in Peru, and he was kind of wanting to look at the paper, not hear me. And so I said to him, "You're not really interested in this, are you?" And he said, "I've just never had such an experience, and I have no way of relating to it."
context.
Which was true.
Yeah,
That's true
absolutely.
of all of us.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then when our son died, well, 2 weeks before his son died, he saw what happened. He saw the car. He saw our son Pishti's body superimposed on it. And he thought to himself, oh, it's almost time for you to do that. And that shocked him. He was in his office working at home. And then he heard Pishti's voice say, "That's right, Dad. I'll be out of the house for a little while." And it was a week after his memorial that his consciousness was back. And so we had long sessions with him, sometimes spontaneous. Especially my husband is like, "I'm wrecking up for time here," because he and Pishti had a funny kind of relationship with it. It was kind of comical. "Okay, Dad, get ready because you've been on ice for a while."
Wow.
So, and he let him know that they were twin souls, that they're sometimes born as two, sometimes as one, and that he had to keep his soul on ice until Pishti left. Then he could know this.
Wow.
And so he was filling
so
him in.
that twin soul, then the connection is already there. So then he starts communicating.
He's just really filling. He said,
Yes.
even going to work, I felt like it was a tape recorder.
Gosh, he must have just been
"Remember, Dad,
flooded, like
remember."
baptized
Yeah,
with
it was.
in knowledge and wisdom. It was
And
just like,
he became my anchor. I mean, it was the funniest thing. And
and when you say sessions, I mean, what does that mean? I mean, it's like we're like Pistis is communicating and is hearing.
yes, well,
or was it just
if it
downloads?
was just drumming or music and meditation, we would lie down, one of us, and the music would be there. And sometimes it was through that, and other times sacred medicine. And so it would last sometimes 2 or 3 hours with sacred medicine, and go into great detail. And Pishti wanted us to know, yes, he's alive. Yes, things are fine, and what he was doing. But he wanted us to know why we chose this life, why he was going across, that he needed to be there to help do this work here. And it would always be remember.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I talk about that all the time. We're not learning anything. We're just remembering.
Remembering, yeah, and that the earth would be going through serious changes. And so then it was after that powerful vision, I didn't connect it with any name. Then Istvan, my husband Istvan, had a vision with Pishti, in which the jackal had been buried, Anubis, Egyptian Anubis.
Yeah, of course.
The jackal eats decayed food and transforms it into life within his body. And so then Istvan was having a vision with the jackal. And then Pishti came in and he said, "Dad, when I'm through talking, go get the I Ching and look up hexagram." And he said, starting from the top, straight, broken, broken, straight, straight, broken. So when it was over, he sat up on the side of the bed and he said, we still have the I Ching, don't we? Because we'd used it maybe a couple of times.
Yeah.
And so I said, yeah, but I'll have to find it. So I ran in my library. I found it, ran back in. And so I went to the back where it has the hexagrams, and I found straight, broken, broken, straight, straight, broken. Went to it. And I remember the jackal myth, working on what has decayed. It was working on what is decayed.
The archetype
The
of that,
archetype
working on what's been decayed is the 18th I Ching.
Yeah.
That's right.
And I said, how could you remember that? And he said, oh, that's easy. And then he gave me the lines. He said, if you take straight, broken, broken, straight, straight, broken, it's ML. It's merchants of light. Merchants of light. And so then I realized that, and it came from the top. It was you start when you throw the I Ching, you go from the bottom up.
Right.
But I later realized they're telling us this light is coming from above, just as I saw in my vision.
Yes, that makes
And
sense.
I realized that the merchants of light have created an energy field that the earth now has a higher frequency, and that we can do our work more easily because of that. And we've called them, and the more we can connect them through our bodies to the earth, the greater freedom we will have in creating this new world. And also it allows people with a higher consciousness to be born into it and know already. And Istvan had a powerful vision also, in which he was there at the creation of everything. Everything was one, and he saw the new child. He said, I don't know exactly how to say it, but it's like a new ring of the DNA, or they were using the, and he said, but if we can accomplish our work, they can accomplish so much more, and they will come in knowing what we're questioning. They'll already know it. And later, you know, when I read Mary Rodwell's work on the new children that are coming in, oh my, and not only hers, but others.
With activated DNA strands and all these different things that have been dormant, waiting for the right time.
And another thing that was interesting is, not right, quite an aside, but a being of light, Ishvan always had a feminine, at the first time he realized there's this feminine image was always there, with, I mean, just vast human, or not human, divine image. And he said she was the most beautiful, but of course, no face. I mean, this, the beauty of that presence of soul or spirit. Yeah. And she was always there. And so then after he told me that, I had this sense of her so strongly, as I did with Merchants of Light, that I was having visions with it. And so I said to Pishti one time, who is she? And he said, oh, Mom, her body covers galaxies.
Oh.
And when I was reading later Mary Rodwell's work, one of those children said, we came from a soul whose body covers galaxies.
Wow.
So there were just, I mean, this light that has come is so powerful, and it flows through each of us. Then I had a lot of experiences. I was working with the group. Is called Studies in Altered States. They were therapists and professors, and mainly therapists, and they worked at the colleges. And so we were getting information about the net of light around the world. Yeah. Then after Pishti, my son, died, he wanted us, with Jenny, his girlfriend, and Dad and I, to go to New Mexico, not Taos. Well, I guess it was.
Yeah, probably Taos. Yeah.
And be there, and that was on his the first year anniversary of his death, the 10th, November 10th, and the 10th is a powerful number, which had worked throughout his life. And so we did, and we worked with medicine at midnight, and the moon was full. Wow. And what I saw was the planet in this glorious bright net of light.
I've seen that net.
And Pishti said, you have?
I have.
He said, that net has been healed. It's connected now. But on the earth, we have to connect it to the earth, which tied into the earlier vision.
Yes.
And then I met a woman, Sharon Meckerlane, who was walking on the beach one day. He lived near the beach, and she saw a group of women, like grandmother types, and they talked to her, and they told her what her work was, that it was to activate this net of light and connect it to the earth. And then they were gone. They were spirit souls. Wow. And she has been so powerful. In fact, I just heard from her not long ago. She travels around the world, initiating people and helping them. They're all connecting to this nodal point and connecting it to the earth. So, and then after the documentary came out, I heard from a woman who lives in Germany, and she wanted me to know that when she went to Chartres Cathedral, she felt there that she had been part of the burning, she said, of the later the witches trials came, and that she said this column of light that was rooted in the above and connected to the below. And I realized it was healing us. So it's just all of these things are so synchronistic happening around the world. And every one of us has our part, and we can't do it without the parts of others. You know, the net.
The net, yeah. Well, I've seen in the last chapter of my book, The Blueprint of a New Humanity, I'm going to be describing the vision that I've seen with that net.
Yeah, tell me.
And what I have felt is that the merchants were the conduits, essentially, that will anchor that net fully into the earth. So the merchants would be the nodal points.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah, and I saw this just great web over the earth,
Oh,
and
that's
that the nodes were violet, like like violet, like the color purple.
Oh, violet.
Yeah, violet, and that the merchants were sort of these pillars that allowed the divine light to come through us to
I
anchor
love
into the earth. That
Well,
the
why
heart.
else would they be called merchants of light? I would think that's a strange name.
Yeah.
But they've been called in other periods, other Renaissance periods.
Right, and
Oh, that's beautiful.
yeah, and that's the final chapter of Blueprint for a New Humanity, where I describe that vision and emphasize the urgency of the work of the merchants to clean up the psychology, to clean up the biology, so that we can be the perfect conduits of that divine light, anchoring it into the earth. And as we do that, as we heal and you know, sort of devour the darkness inside of us, that sort of thing can really begin the anchoring process.
That is beautiful. Well, you know, I have in Miracle that statement that they made, that they come to the earth, and I won't say it as well as it came to me, and I put it down, and Ishvan, is that they come to bring the knowledge for the price of consciousness. We have to pay them the price of our consciousness.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. I wish I had that quotation.
Yeah, I remember that from the thing.
Is that we're all merchants of sorts,
Mm-hmm.
and that we do our work, and we're paid with the development of consciousness in all of us.
Yes. Well, I feel that you know, the way that I'm sort of describing the merchant archetype is through opening the word, and then mer means light. A chant is a devotional expression to the divine. So a merchant is a devotee of the light, is a devotee of the light.
So that's like a chanting of the light.
Exactly. And through that, you know, again, we become the anchors of this consciousness within the earth, to be devoted to the light.
Beautiful.
And when enough of the merchants wake up and remember our task and our role, that we'll conduct commerce together. And again, commerce, another word that open, it's a coming together in the light for Mother Earth, you know, and yeah, communion, community, a coming together. Mer is light, earth is the goddess known as Mother Earth. So it's coming together in the light for Mother Earth. And again, that's the net.
That's the net.
That's the
my
net.
God.
It's the coming together in the light.
And what other dimension it gives that fits perfectly with what I received.
Well, that's why, I mean,
it's
again,
so perfect.
yeah, it was like, so, and then to give people listening some more interesting synchronicity is that this book comes to human awareness after Betty, you know, publishes it in November of 2019. And I've been hot on the trail of asking God, the Great Mother, divinity, divine. I'm like, there is a code, there's a secret with this merchant. Please reveal it. Please reveal it. You published the book, which I don't find until, you know, a few months ago. And within 30 days, the archetype opened. Within 30 days, the archetype opened while I was in the Mayan lands of my own descent. And all of a sudden, I get back and I immediately just, I'm like, oh my gosh. This is what I've been searching for, and all of a sudden now it's open, and we got it, and we end up doing an event on 2/22/2020, and it was called the Delta, the Evolution of Commerce, and you know, sort of display the archetype for everyone to see, the commerce. We have this great event, and then 3 weeks later we get plummeted into COVID. And, we had been making huge momentum and strides and delivering the message that Giving Business Soul has. And all of a sudden, COVID hits, and we have to sort of pivot and assess and readdress it and do all the things we had to do to make it through. And, now we're at this next phase of this entire story. And, I get through the process of completing the first 5 chapters of the book. And then that's when I come into the Merchants of Light and start to devour that. Read it almost a couple times at this point. And I find the synchronicity incredible. Absolutely stunning.
I do too. And the net of light, that I hadn't understood before, that with the merchant, that is incredibly powerful. Well, it certainly shows how it's each individual aspect is necessary for the whole.
Yes.
And we're all one, which means when we die, we don't go back into one, we make the one by being as individualistic as we can and creative as we can be. And that's all needed to make this great community a reality on the planet.
Yeah, and that's the work we're all in right now,
on so many different levels.
On so many levels, and that's the big aspect of why I wanted to start the podcast, was to continue to encourage, especially the entrepreneurial world, that we have a great task at hand. We're talking a great responsibility. I mean, we're talking about 2,600 years of essentially being moved in the wrong direction to now coming back into this knowledge and into the wisdom. And this is the time, if you clearly can feel what's going on the planet. I think we're racing against, sort of an anti-life force.
And in its most extreme form.
And it's the most extreme form because it's got the technology.
Abolish the species if we don't succeed.
Yeah, and that's what we're racing against. Obviously there's a lot of talk about AI and what's happening there, and it feels to me that we are racing against the artificial intelligence. And does that entire strand take hold, or is it our divine intelligence?
It's exactly right. Will we let the people of the Great Reset, we might say, take hold and be the Deuteronomists to control us and tell us what to do, and no creativity, no First Amendment, no voice?
Yeah.
It's not life anymore, or completely do away with us. Or is it this magnificent, enchanted world in which we are co-creators with the divine, creating, loving together?
What feels better?
Right. Which would you choose?
Cold, left brain, logos, mind only. The people of the globalist agenda call us hackable monkeys. Hackable monkeys.
That was amazing.
That the fact that they actually say that.
It was that exact phrase. We are now hackable animals.
Hackable monkeys.
And that is the epitome of the horror of the left brain schizophrenia.
Yeah.
And these people, are they going to be happy? They won't even exist either.
Exactly. And they'll have...
we have to recognize that it is the pathology of our species now.
Yeah.
It is a pathology. We want that pathology healed too.
Yeah.
But first of all, we have to create the world that will not allow that pathology to take over.
Yeah. And we don't have to have the entire human race to actually create the quantum leap, to create this quantum change. My perspective, it's I've been obviously studying the Book of Revelation for almost 15 years now, and decoding aspects of it that I feel are pertinent for this time period, because I believe that book is the only book in the Bible that cannot be tampered with, given its strong metaphoric and allegorical writing. And one of the pieces that they speak about is this 144,000. And my decoding of that is that the 144,000s are these merchants of light, individuals that are carrying a consciousness that allows for a sufficiency of that frequency of light to anchor into the earth, to actually create the quantum leap that we need.
And create the the frequency in the field so that others can be drawn in who wouldn't
Absolutely.
be part of it.
Yeah. As in the book Power versus Force, where David Hawkins talks about that one person carrying the Christ consciousness can elevate millions of people out of the dark depths of the survivable frequency.
Yeah.
And so when you take the 144,000 and you divide it by the 8 billion, you come up to a number that's very close to the critical mass theory, which is a very small fraction that is needed in physics to create a quantum leap.
I need to focus on that. I think we'll feel better.
Yeah, because to think that we need the entire human race, that's an endeavor. But when you think we only need, the critical mass idea, and that can be that 144,000.
And there's so many people
that are now so deep and active. And I believe that the reason that we're seeing so much darkness is because there's so many, so much deep divers going in to alchemize the darkness within us that we're starting to see very clear on the outside.
I know, and it's heartbreaking. I mean, I've had to go through so many times of just heartbreaking periods of what's happening to our children and people and all over the world, and what has happened and what we've been responsible for. But we have to find balance to that. We can't, we have to know it and then balance it with the light.
Well, exactly. And I feel that, no great tragedy isn't also without use for the human species. I certainly am one that bears witness to that suffering, because I think a function of that suffering that is here is meant to break the human heart. Right? It's meant to soften us, to see the suffering. And my encouragement to people is to bear witness to that suffering.
Yeah,
Go look
Don't
at what is
ignore
happening. Don't shy away.
Oh, God, no.
Let it break you open, because it is through the broken human heart that the greatest medicine makes its way into our humanity. Allow yourself to be broken over and over, because awakening is a process of softening.
Wasn't that Khalil Gibran?
Yes.
He said, "How can the heart be opened lest it be broken?"
Yes, that's exactly.
It's true.
My greatest work, I'm heartbroken. I am heartbroken. And the reason that my work, I believe, will carry on is because of that heart that was broken open many, many times. And I remember when I was deep in my journey, at one point I got on my hands and knees and I sort of laid out in a crucifix almost, and I asked God for no mercy. I said, I want it all in this lifetime. I want it all. I want to bear all the suffering that I'm meant to suffer in this lifetime, so I can awaken. I can awaken fully. Because what I began to understand is that the great power is in the suffering. When we learn how to suffer and we learn how to grieve, it's a portal into God.
Well, in my own life, I began to realize, of course, that the archetype of this feminine, the divine wisdom, was calling me home, you might say, or calling her back here. But I also realized that I would have to know what she had gone through.
Exactly.
The earth, that I would have to know that, and that was painful and not what had been experienced, but it was so painful enough for me to realize what had happened to people because she had not been able to be here, had not been integrated into our lives, a part of who we are. And that incredible statement or image of her standing outside the gates of Jerusalem and calling to her people, but no one hears. And so she has to return to the heavens, and she can't be on the earth. And we've called her back, but she wants us to know what we had to suffer because of her absence.
Absolutely. Yeah. I believe that my understanding of not history, right, his story, but of her story.
It is
her story. And when you venture into the depths of what has happened with the eradication of this feminine principle in our life, and as a result, the amount of suffering that the feminine had to take on over the last 2,600 years, that's heartbreaking.
It's heartbreaking, and it's every single individual has been her.
Yeah, exactly.
In a suffering state, even when we don't know it. I mean, even when we become serial killers. I mean, that is such a state without her, without the heart, without the connection to the heart of the earth and the heart of the cosmos. They were miserable. You know, what's it matter if I destroy the world? There's nothing anyway.
Sure, it's void of the.
It's just that tragedy. What a story that we have given our children. And I had an experience too that was of out in Death Valley with a shaman, and Ishran was with me, and I was stuck in the underworld. You know, you hear those stories of getting stuck in the underworld.
I know
thought,
that.
"What was that?" Well, I was. I couldn't come back, and it wasn't until I felt some energy that was so tragic and so powerful sweeping across the desert. And I knew what it was going to say. I knew it was going to say it in me, and I begged it not to say it. And it screeched through my voice, "It can never be healed." And I knew that was the voice of her, of the people of the earth, separated from her. And oh my God, that was later. I had a vision of that wonderful image that Istvan had been with and that I had come to know, coming back, and she came on the other side of a river, and she stepped in a canoe, and just the canoe brought her to me, and I realized I had that voice of the desert in me, that was still there. And she then embraced me and entered into my heart. And I knew that she is the archetype of the total feminine that can heal the split off feminine in which all of the people have suffered from, is that she came to heal that. And that was healing for me too, to some degree.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, that to me also, you know, again, some of the fascinating things with our own lives, but when I was born, my mother dedicated me to the great cosmic mother.
Oh my goodness.
She, because coming from the Hispanic Mexican tradition, they're so big with Virgen de Guadalupe, which is really the cosmic mother, and you know that it's sort of the solar feminine, because around her image you see solar flares all the way around. And so that's right. So it's sort of this like, as you mentioned, this lady who sort of envelops galaxies. So she came, I feel, and to sort of begin the atonement process. And back in the 1500s, when that first miracle appears. And at the time of my birth, my mother was alone in the birthing room and was in prayer to her. And
that's a synchronicity.
What a synchronicity. And I didn't know this until maybe 7 years ago, where I was inquiring about things. And she told me the story that she says, that I prayed to the great cosmic mother and asked for your safe passage. And I can get emotional thinking about it, but it's like, if you're to grant him safe passage, he will be yours.
A lot of people are involved in re-enchanting the world.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a beautiful thing, and that I have become the prayer of my mother. And to discover these things as I'm journeying through my own sort of quest here on the planet, and it's been a beautiful revelation, because I feel that that's what I'm here to do, is to reestablish that connection and to help other individuals, entrepreneurs, to do that.
Exactly. And I think that's what we realize, when we start catching on, and then we realize that we want the tapestry has billions and millions of threads, and we want to be a part of the great tapestry.
That's right.
To be a thread within it.
Yeah.
And so it's what more can we do? What can I do? And
and this is, to your point, this is what is known as the great work. Right, the great work is any effort made in the endeavor of bringing union between the poles inside of us.
Exactly.
That is what it is, and it really is about bringing harmony between the masculine and feminine, these poles inside of us, the light and the dark,
and connecting us to the cosmos.
Yes, and bringing that consciousness back in, because until that union is complete, that consciousness cannot make its way through the vehicle in a very fluid form.
That's right, and we're miserable without it.
Yeah, Yeah.
What's missing? The missing pieces that we
This
started out
is
with.
this is yeah, exactly, the missing piece. This is what's caused the pathology of our species. And it's no blame on anyone. I think that that's the big part of the conversation. We have simply been in ignorance. We did not know. Had we known the truth, we certainly, would have done it this way. And the only, ones winning right now are the ones on top of this thing, kind of playing divide and conquer with the human species.
Yeah, and I think, that's an illness. They're looking for a missing piece, and they think that's it. So we want healing for the whole planet. It's and of course, they have been that darkness that has also ignited us.
Yeah, absolutely. It's such a fascinating dualistic perspective, but if it were not for that, also we probably wouldn't, get activated in that way where it's like, hey, it's go time. But, well, Betty, I mean, I don't even know how long we've been in the chatting for at this point. I think I covered a lot of what I intended to cover and additional stuff. Any other threads that you want to pull on? Any other things that might be of interest before we close?
I think we probably said it. I think the most important thing for us to remember, as Henry Miller used to always say, remember to remember, is to remember who we are. We can do anything if we do it in the knowledge that we are immortal, we are divine, loving beings, and we can create. With William Henry's talk on the Essenes, their ability to create was phenomenal, according to him. And it gives one just a hint of what we really can do. Because they worked with forces in the cosmos that were so powerful. And we can do that too. We can do anything as creators if we know who we are and we follow the laws of soul, of nature, of the universe.
That's gorgeous. Well, I think with that, we can close this podcast. To everyone listening, thank you so much for opening your heart to this conversation. We're certainly presenting things that I felt a necessity for people to learn about as this consciousness that is enveloping the earth continues to root itself more and more. I believe we're going to be revealed, have greater and greater revelations about the truth of who we are, our role on the planet, our cosmic intelligence. This is the greatest time to have been born in human history. This is the greatest story in the universe, and all eyes are on us as a collective, as individuals. Your being here is not for naught. You have an important role to play, especially if you're listening to this podcast, because there are synchronicities that cannot be explained. And for you to come into this knowledge, to this wisdom, it's for a reason. And so I encourage you to take what you've listened and heard and let it become a prayer for you. Let it become a way of being. Let it become the new consciousness that we're here to anchor all of us into. So with that, much love, and thank you as always for listening to the Giving Business Soul podcast. Thank you for joining us on the Giving Business Soul podcast. If you want to learn more about the transformative work we're doing, please visit our website at givingbusinesssoul.com. Discover how you can make a difference in the world through your business while fulfilling your spirit, enhancing your health, vitality, and relationships. And until next time, stay inspired, my friend.